Morning, everybody. This topic is a tropical fever syndrome with or without thrombocytopenia. These slides are almost 3 years old, and they have not been changed just because nothing more is changed in the management of all these diseases, which I am going to talk in the next 30 minutes. Why it is important? Because maybe twice in a year, all the people who are working in ICU, tertiary level, primary or the secondary level, they all are receiving the subset of the patients in their ICU. And because they mimic and their clinical presentation is mimic and overlapping to each other, hence you need to put in that aspect. All these diseases which is not new, which has been taught during your MBBS training, I am not going to detail of that. It is only the critical care perspective we are going to discuss. So tropical fever, so basically sudden an onset and seasonal variation, as we have just passing through this zone is passing through H1N1 kind of a epidemic so far. Maybe it's now in the fag end, but still we are receiving a good number of the H1N1 positive patients or viral syndrome patients, which where the diagnosis is yet to be made. So it's having a seasonal variation. Most of the time it is being seen after the post-rainy season, and it is because the vectors growth goes up during that season, which helps in transmission of these diseases. And mostly among these tropical fever syndrome, there are some of the diseases which are having a waterborne. So because of the contamination of the food and the water, these diseases. And here is the list of those diseases which I am going to discuss very quickly in a very short. I am not going to discuss about the detail of the disease, only the critical care perspective. So moving forward, these are the list of the causes which cause a thrombocytopenia, and if I'll take it's immune destruction, bone marrow suppression because of a disease or some drug. DIC, quinine, sometimes used for the complicated malaria, which is also one of the reasons, and you have to be watchful if you are using it for the treatment of the malaria, complicated malaria. But one has to be very, very watchful about the platelet level, because you should not wait for your platelet level drop down to 5,000. Now it's the new is the 10,000, and our morbid fear is your patient if having a CNS leak or CNS hemorrhage. That's a morbid fear remain in the mind of the all intensivists who are managing these patients with the coagulation disorder or coming with these tropical fever with the thrombocytopenia. So to start with the dengue fever, dengue is basically a viral illness. And the virus is a flavivirus, belongs to the Flaviviridae family. It's a 4 subserotype, including your DAN1 to DAN4. It's a clinical syndrome, and there is a 3 type of the presentation in a dengue fever. One is the simple dengue fever, where the patients are just coming to the OPD, getting their treatment, going back and just managing. Or maybe some of the patients who are still having a dengue infection, but they are not giving that kind of the presentation, and you are just managing with your sore throat, running nose and all, and a fever and body aching. That's all. It's simple supportive treatment you have. Second is your dengue hemorrhagic fever, and third is your dengue shock syndrome. So being an intensivist, you are dealing with these 2 subtypes, dengue hemorrhagic fever and the dengue shock syndrome. Incubation period 5 to 6 days, roughly goes 3 to 10 days, and the vector is Aedes aegypti and albopictus. These are the 2 vectors which contributes into the transmission of the dengue, albopictus and Aedes. And the reason is that incubation period in mosquito, if they get infected with this virus, is 8 to 10 days. And once they are infected, they will remain, infected for throughout their life cycle. So once the mosquito is infected with the Aedes virus, dengue virus, they will remain infected throughout their life cycle. Pathophysiology. It's the severity of the disease results from a secondary infection with the second strain of the virus. And the most important part which you have to understand, that once the patient has first time had an infection with the DAN1 or maybe DAN2, and next time if are having an infection, second time they got exposure with the DAN3 or DAN4, there is a high likely chances that this patient will land into a dengue hemorrhagic fever and dengue shock syndrome. So IgG, IgM is very important when you are sending investigation at a particular duration to know about whether the person has a previous exposure of a same infection or not. As we all know, it's a dengue hemorrhagic fever and dengue shock syndrome due to the increased capillary permeability. It's nothing new. It's the same mechanism which is being found in a sepsis. And if I am saying the sepsis is a organ dysfunction with dysregulated host response. and including in that you are causing an activation of your cellular as well as humoral immunity, including your complement activation, cytokine release, leading into your multiple organs. So same mechanism basically works there. So maybe by the time you are receiving the patient from the casualty trials in your ICU, patient is already having a multiple organ involvement. So the list which I just mentioned and discussed, these diseases, they can present with either with the mono-organ involvement, or they can present at the time, with the multiple organ involvement, as you are finding in most of the sepsis patient. So sepsis is basically a syndrome. Cause could be viral, bacterial or fungal. So take that way, mechanism is the same, the TNF-alpha, that your cytokines are coming and causing at the cellular level, causing all these problems with capillary leak and leaking of your plasma, leading into your hemodynamic instabilities. So as the sepsis, by the time you receive most of your patients in ICU having the 3 organ system involvement, respiratory system involvement, cardiovascular and the renal. So same you will find here if you are these patients coming to the ICU with the dengue hemorrhagic and dengue shock syndrome, depending on their overall status. And next, as you find that, I am just directly going to the dengue hemorrhagic fever. It's a severe form of the dengue, because being an intensivist, I am concerned with those subset of patients who are coming to the ICU. I am not concerned with those patients who are visiting the OPD and just going back to the home. And it is only the plasma leakage due to the increased vascular permeability differentiates the dengue fever from the dengue hemorrhagic fever. Presentation, as you are seeing on your screen, is a severe patient can present with a severe abdominal pain, vomiting, with GI symptoms, gastroenteritis kind of the symptoms, where you might be thinking that patient might have some kind of food poisoning. It can mimic that way. It can mark the change in the temperature. Patient can be hypothermic or hyperthermic, can have a hemorrhagic manifestation at the time of presentation in the form of your maybe epistaxis, maybe having some other, pulmonary hemorrhages, GI hemorrhages, melena and vomiting. And sometimes in a severe patients, some patients come to the ICU with a CNS involvement. But rarely these patients are having a hematuria. So hematuria is not a usual presentation in a dengue, it's a rare. And this is how it basically particular hemorrhages looks like. Some words about the misconception. As I said, this lecture is not being changed so much because nothing is changed much about the management of these patients. So slides and colors, everything is same for the last couple of almost 2-3 years. Whatever changes are basically had made and advices given by the WHO, we have incorporated in this presentation. So coming to the misconception, number 1, the dengue hemorrhagic fever is not a dengue plus bleeding. You need a fraud criteria to label a patient having a dengue hemorrhagic fever. Number 2, dengue hemorrhagic fever kills by hemorrhage. This is a misconception. It is not. It is because of the shock, because of your plasma leakage through the capillary leak syndrome, which is a part of a systemic inflammatory response as a part of the sepsis. And positive tourniquet test, although it was advised way back in 90s that apply the tourniquet, count the petechiae, in a particular area, and you can make a diagnosis. Tourniquet test is basically tells you only about the capillary fragility and nothing else. Capillary fragility you can find in a whole lot of other conditions other than dengue. What are the 4 essential criteria? Number 1, fever with recent history of the acute fever lasting for 2 to 7 days. Hemorrhagic manifestations, as I mentioned, and the positive tourniquet test, petechiae, purpura, ecchymosis, bleeding from the mucosa or the GIT. This is the common presentation at the time when the patient is coming to the casualty trials. Thrombocytopenia should be there, criteria number 3, and 4 is the objective evidence of the leaky capillaries, because of the capillary leak as a part of the systemic inflammatory response. So where you will find when you are receiving a patient which is having a elevated hematocrit, hematocrit is down by 20% after the IV fluid. Evidence of the plasma leakage means polyserositis. You are finding patient is coming to the pleural fusion, peritoneal collection, and these are some of your danger sign. You have to be very, very cautious. Why you have to be cautious? Because preemptively you have to counsel your patient attendant that by the time I am receiving a patient in my ICU, this is the status and these are high likely chances. And if you are doing some severity scoring in your ICU, which you have to do, Apache 2 scoring, which you can use, is the most widely used. Do your Apache 2 scoring in the first 24 hours with the least of the value in the first 24 hours and calculate that, and based on that you do your counseling. But counseling is the most integral part and important part in the overall management of the ICU. Patient is not going to create a problem. Patient is not going to ask you any question in ICU. It is only the attendants, and counseling is only for the attendants. If you look in well informed, if you are going to tell them well in advance, preemptively, that these are the possibilities your patient is going to have, you are not going to have any problem. Problem is only you find in an ICU and critical care is the element of suddenness. When you said something, fine, and suddenly at the next moment you will call the family and say, okay, your patient had this problem. Then they are going to ask you the question, अभी तक तो आप कह रहे थे पेशेंट मेरा ठीक है, suddenly अचानक से क्या हुआ? So just mind it and follow it for rest of your life. Just try to minimize and remove the element of suddenness in the counseling. Your life will be much easier in a time to come. Moving forward, dengue shock syndrome. What is the presentation? It's a classical presentation of the shock. And I am saying the shock is only 4 types. Hypovolemic shock, hemorrhagic, non-hemorrhagic, cardiogenic, distributive shock, and your obstructive shock. If I am saying the distributive shock is having a sepsis. What else? Neurogenic shock, anaphylaxis. They are all an example of the distributive shock, right? Obstructive, pulmonary embolism, right? So it's only the shock, the classical presentation you are seeing on your. Now looking at these all bold letters: generalized seizure, petechiae, tachycardia, tachypnea, desaturation, hypotension, polycerositis. You will find that if your patient is coming with a high, PCD, hematocrit, you have to remain very, very watchful that my patient might be heading towards the dengue hemorrhagic fever or dengue shock syndrome. You have to be very, very cautious. Take all your precautions and resuscitate the patient. And dengue IgM positivity says that patient already had an infection and exposure. Now, what is the dengue shock syndrome? It's a combination of the dengue hemorrhagic fever with shock and evidence of the circulatory failure manifested by all of the following. These all are a classical presentation of the shock. Remember that diagram in your 11 valley, starting from the top to the down. Remember that which you were taught in your MBBS. The same, nothing new. So moving forward, as in a critical care perspective and intensive, you have to be very, very, very watchful regarding all these clinical signs. And remember one thing, again now we are started teaching. You have to correlate everything clinically. So as a dictum, never treat the values, treat the patient instead. And try to correlate all your investigation with the clinical picture of the patient. I can give you one of the examples, just moving forward, your COPD patients, you will find your ABG maybe showing the PCO2 level of the 70 or 75. A patient is sitting nicely fine. So don't look at the value you are getting, perturbed, okay, PCO2 is going up, hypercarbia is there, maybe this patient is going to have a problem. So that's why I just took an as an example to give you that always try to correlate your picture, your values with your clinical picture. So treat the patient in totality, not the values. So moving forward, what are the unusual presentations? As I mentioned, all these conditions, which I am going to discuss one by one, they can present as a mono-organ or as a multiple organ involvement. So they can have any organ involvement, CNS involvement, hepatic, cardiac, GI, and can come with the multiple organ involvement. Tourniquet test, few words very quickly. Inflate the cup between the systolic and diastolic, wait for 5 minutes and just count. More than 20. So as I said, this is not a very specific test only for the dengue. It only tells you about capillary fragility, right? Most important. This particular diagram is showing you here. I am using my cursor. A temperature coming down to almost to the day 3, and viremia, look at here, down. Viremia is also going same with the same along with your temperature coming down. Now when you are going to send your NS1 is coming positive only this duration during the viremia. When you send your investigation, maybe you have sent the investigation on a day when you are not going to get any positive, and you will say my patient is not having a dengue, which otherwise is having a positive dengue test. So your IgG, IgM is going to come positive only at this level. They started coming from the 3-day onward, and the peak goes up to day 6. So you have to be very, very cautious when you are sending all these investigations for the diagnosis of dengue. It's a timing is most important. As I mentioned, 1 to 3 days NS1 positive, and the second IgG, IgM has to be going to take a peak on the starting from the day 3 and 4, in between day 3 and 4, and taking the peak by the 6. And it remain almost positive for even if you have given a complete treatment, they remain positive for next 3 weeks. So moving forward, what is the management? All supportive management. Correct the shock, give organ support. If it is a respiratory, give respiratory organ support. If it is a hepatic, if it is a renal, so it's all a supportive treatment I am passing on. Right? Clear? Moving forward. It's clear now. For the renal support, you have to give a renal replacement therapy. For if patient is having a work of breathing high or respiratory support, you have to put a patient on an NIV or an invasive mode of ventilation, and accordingly. So what you should avoid during the treatment of these patients, all NSAIDs, group of antibiotic, medicines and aspirin, corticosteroids. Platelet transfusion has to be given as per your policy. It should not be unnecessary given. Keep a watch on when the patient is bleeding. Even if the patient is bleeding with the 50,000 count, you have to replace your platelet. But if your patient is not bleeding, still your platelet count is coming down to less than 20 or up to 20. Be watchful. Don't let the patient to bleed. And the most morbid fear is the CNS leak. It should not be there. CNS hemorrhage, nobody basically, it's a morbid fear remains in all the mind, and that's why in all the coagulation disorder and all these kind of situation, you have to be watchful. So platelet transfusion as per your policy, and the crystalloid colloids depends how you want to manage these shocks. Coming to the again next condition is the falciparum malaria. These are the patients who do come with their clinical presentation. They can have a CNS involvement, respiratory involvement, renal, hepatic, can present only with the hypoglycemia with your altered sensorium, and can have acidosis, and also can come with the multiple organ involvement. For last 2 or 3 years, we are also receiving severe Plasmodium vivax infection with multiple organ, which was not to be considered as some serious condition, but now we are receiving 2 or 3 patients in a year in our hospital, with Plasmodium vivax infection, not with the falciparum. So you can have that kind of the presentation also. Pathophysiology, we all taught. It's RBCs are get infected, they get clump, rosetting, causing the blockage at the capillary level, causing the organ dysfunction, leading into organ failure. So you have to be watchful, and again the mechanism of the inflammation will remain the same: cellular, humoral activation, release of the cytokine, and multiple organ involvement. Case presentation, classical, patient can have a chills, but most of the time we don't have the classical presentation which you are taught in a MBBS training in the medicine. Patient can have a varied presentation, come through the casualty trials leading into the ICU, where patient can have a low counts, low platelet count, increasing transaminitis, PT-INR or deranged liver involvement, and hence polycirrhosis also. It can come with the pleural effusion. So this is a common kind of the presentation you will find in most of the patients with the sepsis. If I am using the word sepsis, it means cause could be viral, bacterial, and the fungal. And these are some of the abnormal presentation when the patient mimicking your meningococcemia, right? Meningococcal septicemia. They can mimic that way also. So one has to remain watchful. And when you are receiving these patients in that particular period where these patients do come in during the endemic or during epidemic period, you have to send the battery of the test and take the history, very elaborate history, and stand the investigation accordingly and start your treatment, keeping in view all these conditions. Diagnostic degree of the parasitemia you have to determine. Gold standard is basically thin and thick peripheral smear, which is a gold standard for the diagnosis of the malaria. Rapid diagnostic tests, HRP2 and LDH. LDH is basically indicative of your hemolysis. More than 600 is considered to be significant. Anything less than 600 is not significant. So HRP2 test is basically remain positive for the next 2 to 3 weeks, even you have given a complete treatment or patient had a complete remission. Immunofluorescence microscopy and PCR, the other techniques for the diagnosis of the malaria, falciparum malaria. What are the poor prognostic indicator of the falciparum? These are the list. You can read yourself. Convulsion, hypoglycemia, lactatemia, anuria or renal involvement, platelet count low, hematocrit less than 15, and your bilirubin is on the high, which is indicative that hemolysis is going on, and there is a parasitemia is more than 1,000, 100,000 or 1 lakh. Treatment part. Choice artemisinin therapy or artemisinin combination therapy. If I am saying artemisinin combination therapy is the artesunate plus long-acting antimalarials. May I know the name of the long-acting antimalarials? Lumefantrine. What else? Mefloquine, amidaquine, and sulfadoxamine pyrimethamine. These are the long-acting and antimalarials which is used along with the artemisinin. This is the ACT. ACT is the most therapy which is to be given in these patients which are received in ICU, because by the time you are receiving these patients, they are already sick. So treat the hypoglycemia if the patient is coming, blood and platelet transfusion based on your protocol and the requirement of the patient, and organ support as per the requirement. I am just simply using this line to give respiratory, renal and other supports. Primaquine to be given in the dose of 0.75 milligram per kilogram as a single dose on a day 2 as a gametocidal action to prevent the recurrence, right? Divided into two, uncomplicated and complicated. Uncomplicated, we are using the same ACT combination. Coming to the complicated malaria, artesunate IV in the dose of 2.5 milligram per kilogram IV as a first dose, followed by the 2.4 milligram per kilogram 12 hourly or 24 hours, followed by 2.4 milligram once daily, or you can use 1.2 milligram per kilogram IV 12 hourly, right? And then you have to remember one thing: oral artemisinin mountain therapy is banned in India. That's a regulation. One should not use it because it is adding into the resistance. Coming to the typhoid, quickly, they can also mimic, they can also present that way. A patient can have a fever, can have a diarrhea, can present with the shock, can present with the liver involvement, can present with the renal involvement. And the gold standard, if you are making your diagnosis, the blood culture. Somebody will ask you, what's a test, a definitive test for the diagnosis of typhoid? It is only the blood culture, right? Vidal test, what should be, when you will say the Vidal test is positive or it's a significant, what should be the dilution? 1:? I think anything above, when 160 and above is taken to be significant, but blood culture, remember one thing, the answer will be the blood culture for the diagnosis. Typhoid fever, complicated typhoid fever may present as a dengue, can mimic as a dengue, as a malaria, can present as a neurological involvement, can present as a mono-organ and a multiple organ. That's why I said all these conditions which are kept in this presentation, they mimic each other and they basically can overlap their symptoms. So hence be very, very careful on that. How you are going to make a diagnosis? First week, it is the blood culture. Second week is the antibody or Vidal test. Third week is stool culture. Fourth week, urine test. Typhoid, Typhi-DOT, which we usually do. Typhi-DOT, which we usually do, detects the IgM, IgG antibodies against the outer membrane protein of the Salmonella typhi, and the Typhi-DOT test becomes positive within 2 to 3 days of the infection. You can send the Typhi-DOT, but send the blood culture also to make your definitive diagnosis. Treatment, fluoroquinolones, ceftriaxone, azithromycin. Clear? Pharmacology I am not going to discuss, that's all being taught and you can go through on that. Right? But remember one thing, in our part of the world, we are having a resistant salmonella infection or typhoid infection. Where all these medicines are not going to work, you have to use your carbapenem group of the antibiotics. We had one nursing staff who got infected with the resistant, where we have to start with the meropenem along with the steroids, and the dose of the steroid is 3 mg per kilogram followed by 1 mg per kilogram every 6 hourly for the total of 48 hours. Remember one thing, resistant salmonella is prevalent in this part of the world and number is very high. Coming to the Leptospira very quickly, spirochetal disease, Leptospira interrogans infection occurs due to exposure to the contaminated water. Average incubation period is 10 days, mostly non-specific febrile illness, and most pathognomonic kind of feature is the conjunctival hemorrhage or conjunctival suffusion. But you have to differentiate into the conjunctivitis. The difference between the conjunctival suffusion or hemorrhage in Leptospira and the conjunctivitis is that in conjunctivitis you will find a discharge, which you won't find here. So severely ill patient with the hepatorenal dysfunction with pulmonary hemorrhage is called Wheel syndrome, and this usually develops within 4 to 9 days into the illness. In Mumbai, they found it 35%, 70% had a renal involvement. Patient with conjunctival suffusion, which I said is a pathognomony, which you can see from the distance and make out the high suspicion that this patient is having a Leptospira. Test takes almost 5 days to come regarding, but you can start your treatment based on that. And more likely is the microagglutination test positive by that time. 80% patient on autopsy shows the pulmonary hemorrhages. So you have to distinguish again with the malaria, and Leptospira can take on that and they can mimic in the same way. Lab diagnosis, WBC count, CPK, CSF and CXR. As I said, the CSF, if you are doing, the patient can have mimic the aseptic meningitis kind of a presentation. Chest X-ray, because of pulmonary hemorrhages, you will have a confluence, and microscopic agglutination test is a gold standard. Treatment, penicillin, ceftriaxone and doxycycline. Right? Moving forward, H1N1. Too much of the publicity, too much of the awareness, everybody knows on that. And this is how it basically, pig is basically working as a reservoir from human or the bird, transmission from man to the man. Patient can present with the high fever, coughing, sneezing, breathing difficulties and the loss of the appetite. And these are the types which you, for your knowledge, it's the influenza virus primarily. Influenza A is H1N1, or influenza A is the H3N2, influenza B, and avian influenza is the H5N1 or H7N9. These all belongs to the influenza family. H1N1 is one of them. So remember one thing, I'm just sharing my last month, we had a good number of the H1N1 patient. Initial test turned out to be negative. We started the oseltamivir based on the suspicion and based on the epidemic kind of a profile of our region, but initially it turned out to be negative. When we sent the viral panel, it turned out to be positive. So I'm not saying don't take it word, it's our anecdote, our way of practice. We decided then for last 1 month and all that we give a 5 days of the treatment. What we did that in those patients, we stopped the oseltamivir. Later on the day of 4-5 when we had a second report, it turned out to be a positive H1N1. So we found that if you are having a suspicion, you have to start, even if it is a 48 hour late or patient is coming late, it always gives a benefit to the patient. This is how it can present in a diagrammatic representation, right? And I think H1N1 is something which everybody sitting in this room, they know about how they present, how they are, in which condition patients are coming and how you are managing them. This is how the X-ray picture looks like. This is one of the case presentation which we take just to enumerate a patient coming with the clinical deterioration and your X-ray deterioration very quick. These confluent shadows, which is just fluffy shadows founding on the X-ray, worsening, patient presenting with the shock, you are managing them. With your shock, patient might need a multiple vasopressor depending on the requirement, and the guideline will be the same as per your surviving sepsis campaign guideline to manage the shock and those vasopressors accordingly. I am moving forward quickly. This patient deteriorated after 6 hours, being given a management of the shock. After 12 hours, 8 hours, patient delivered, live baby. Patient was on 3 vasopressors. Try to maintain the MAP as per your guideline. On suspicion, we have started the antiviral as well as the antibacterial. And the picture, we know that when you do the resuscitation in a shock patients, their capillary leaking into a third spacing, and the X-ray basically worsens. That's the initial phase when you are doing the salvage. We all know about the 4 phases of the fluid therapy: salvage when you are doing the resuscitation, then coming to SOSD, optimization, stabilization, and de-escalation. 4 phases. Try to do your fluid resuscitation and the fluid management based on these 4 headings now and onward. Now coming to the presentation, it's could be mild, progressive and complicated. We receive a complicated patient and a progressive patient in ICU when patient already having a respiratory involvement, hemodynamic involvement, or maybe the 3 renal involvement by the time they reach to the ICU. And they can also present this way. They can have an H1N1 can involve anything, and they can mimic anything, and they can present in any way. And this is how you can look into your diagrammatic. I'm just going right. So H1N1 can mimic this way and can present this way. Be cautious and take your call if your patient is coming during that. So these diseases are important in that way. So what should be the treatment? Regardless of the illness duration, who are the high risk patient, less than 5 years, more than 65, pregnant, chronic medical condition, weakened immune patients, all your immunocompromised patients, a patient who is less than 90 and receiving the aspirin, they should all be given a treatment. Treatment, just enumerating, that is not going to the oseltamivir in a tablet form, zanamivir is in an inhalation form, baloxavir, peramivir, and lenacapavir. These are. But remember one thing: whenever you are giving a treatment, always give a cover for a gram positive. We had one patient last week. We shifted to some other place, had a gram positive Staph aureus infection along with the positive H1N1. Had a empyemothoracis, brain was placed, and she underwent a surgery for the correction. H1N1 critical care, invasive mode of ventilation is preferred over or your non-invasive, and your ventilator should have an expiratory port filter. So at least the healthcare provider who are working in the vicinity of the patient should not be, these patients should be cohorted or should be kept in an isolation room, in a negative pressure room where you are maintaining a -2 to -8 atmospheric pressure. So the outside air is moving in, inside air is not going. So negative pressure rooms should be used. If they are not available, cohort them, provide 1:1 nursing care with all your barrier nursing. Right? These are the other modalities which are also being used. HFNC in an initial phase when you are taking of the patient, or maybe initially you can give it a try. Early proning, ECMO. Coming to the hantavirus. This is the second last infection which I am discussing very quickly. I am going through. It belongs to the Bunia. It's basically a Bunia virus acquired by exposure to aerosol of the rodent, urine, saliva, and also the feces. This is being coming to the existence during the Second World War, where the army personnel who got infected and died, they found that this was because of this hantavirus infection in the area of the Australia, New Zealand, that area where Indian troops were fighting. They died of this hantavirus because of this. And the two presentation: hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome, hantavirus cardiopulmonary syndrome. So these are the two presentations. Patient again will be the same: thrombocytopenia, can have a hemolysis with the LDH characterization. ELISA, IgM, IgG antibodies will be there, and you can detect with them. Treatment, no treatment is available, it's only the supportive. In China, they use the ribavirin to manage that. They can mimic dengue and the leptospira. So be careful, that's why these all conditions are kept in the same heading. And usually prevalence in the South America, Europe and the China, but definitely in that part, Australian and New Zealand part, during the Second World War, troops were died because of this infection. Treatment, no effective treatment as I mentioned. It's only a supportive treatment. Ribavirin was tried in China for the HFRS, hemorrhagic fever, renal syndrome patients in a hantavirus. Now last is your scrub typhus, rickettsial disease caused by Orencia sushigamoshi, is basically detected in Japan in a wasteland, and it causes the infected vascular endothelium and induce the injury in the organ like the skin, liver, kidney, meninges and the brain. Again I said it can also present as a mono-organ as well as in a multiple organ. And in a south part of the Delhi, in Shaket hospital receives a good number. I'm not saying the good number, but definitely a number which is significant number of the scrub patients. We do receive very less in the east part of Delhi in our hospital, scrub patients. So always keep them in a differential diagnosis, send their investigation and start your treatment. Right? Presentation will be the same. They can mimic. Now moving forward, what are the complications? Again, depending on the organ involvement, pneumonitis, liver involvement, cardiac involvement, meningoencephalitis, DIC and the multiple organ involvement. So all these 7 conditions which I just discussed, they can present as a single multiple organ and can overlap each other. So you have to be watchful, you have to be careful when you are receiving these patients. And the treatment part which I am saying again, it's a doxycycline, chloramphenicol, and the azithromycin. So leptospira, scrub typhus and all these conditions you are using. Doxycycline, somebody will say, why you are using the doxy in a dengue? Doxycycline is an immunomodulatory antibiotic. Other group of antibiotics are your macrolides. So what they do, doxycycline also giving a cover to all those group of the antibacterial spectrum. Other than it is also helping in bringing down your IL-1, IL-6 and TNF-alpha level. So that's why doxycycline is helping in dual way, immunomodulatory. So to conclude, dengue fever, malaria, leptospira, sometimes the typhoid fever are the main cause in Indian context, where fever with thrombocytopenia may be a leading presentation and they can mimic and they can overlap. They may present in an ICU, definitely with a MODS or maybe a mono-organ involvement, and there is a definitely, they creates a diagnostic dilemma. So you have to take, based on your suspicion, based on your history, all these conditions, send the bounty of the test and start your treatment empirically to cover that. And in complicated and life-threatening situation in ICU, initial empirical treatment should be started. So doxy has to be the mainstay among that, and this is the message, this is our experience.